as Elliot mentioned, I'm the director of GRI's Focal Point USA and Canada. We've actually expanded now to include the Canadians, so welcome to you Canadians out there. And it's my honor and privilege today to introduce it to an American audience for actually the third time, our chairman of the board of GRI, is international chairman of the board, Herman Mulder. The first time was at a minority business meeting that was going on here in New York, because a lot of small businesses and the SBA and the Minority Business Council of New York City was asking GRI to be in the room because large corporations were starting to ask their suppliers some really hard questions about sustainability. The second time, it took some convincing, but I was able to get Mr. Mulder out to the middle of the country in St. Louis, where actually after talking to our chief executive and talking to GRI staff for quite a few weeks about this, I finally was able to convince him to come all the way to St. Louis, where we had our first year anniversary. Ends up he had one heck of a time out there, made a lot of good friends and made quite the impression in the middle of the country, and it was quite a ripple effect across the country. And this is the third time that I get to introduce him, but I'm going to be a little bit more formal here because he's quite a reputation, and then he's actually part of an organization I didn't even know existed called World Connectors, and he's truly that. And when you look at his bio, if you see it online, you'll see that there's a lot of different things that Mr. Mulder's done over his lifetime. But probably one of the most impressive that I learned a little bit more about last night was that he was, as a banker for ABN AMRO, he got together with a group of about a dozen very large multinational banks about a dozen years ago and initiated this conversation amongst the finance industry on what sustainability means to them, and particularly around project financing. For those of you in the field, you might know of something called the Equator Principles, but Herman Mulder was there at the very beginning of it, and he could be credited with the creation of this. Now, for us in this community, having a banker talk about these issues is not only a key moment in time for us, but it's also in a very insightful position to be in when you're looking at these issues across the globe. So with that, I'd like to bring up Herman Mulder and Dirk Olin, who will interview him afterward for a few questions. Herman?
Thank you, Mike. Welcome, Dirk.
Likewise.
In the beginning, there was no path until someone started walking. And then more people joined the walk, and more, and more. It becomes a crowd. And of course, there are restaurants or bars during that trip of all the people on the road to celebrate what you have been doing and to recalibrate where you're going. This is really a great event. Really unfortunate I cannot stay longer than this afternoon. But the celebration, the success stories which have been told here are clearly something which we need to do much more, because those are an inspiration for all of us to move forward on this crowded road. I would like to thank the organizers, Shared Expertise, Commit Forum, our partners, New York Stock Exchange, Mosaic, Sprint, all of those making this possible and happen. And I'm the organizers very grateful that when they invite a keynote speaker, there are 3 spaces on the agenda you can put him. The worst one is at the end of the first day, because every other speaker took more time than necessary. And also you're in between the second last speaker and the drinks, so you know you are in a hurry. The second worst is early morning, because you need to have a wake-up call for everyone, and you know that people arrive late. So you are distracted, the participants are distracted as well. The best one is right now. It's still a graveyard shift, and I notice that some people are doing the dishes. But it is good because Dirk and I have still the time to create a problem for the speakers hereafter, and particularly the last one, who is going to stand between you and the drinks. So let me wake you up, if you want, after the lunch. And let me explain to you why I'm here. Yes, I have a cap, I have a role, the chairman of GRI, but that's not why I'm here. That's maybe what the organizers think, but that's not why I'm here in New York, in Mumbai, or wherever in the world. As Mike was saying, I was a banker until 2006. I was the Deputy Chief Risk Officer of ABN AMRO Bank. In that capacity, I was the chair of the Group Risk Committee. And when I left in 2006, because I felt the limitations of banking were too much and I wanted to dedicate my life completely to business and sustainability, I had my own wake-up call at Christmas 2008. I was a self-professed expert on crises, risk management, and what have you. And it frustrated me why I did not see the financial crisis coming. So, as often happens in the middle of the night, you wake up, you have those lucid moments, you wish, and as a matter of fact, I had a piece of paper and a pen, and I scribbled a couple of things, which often, if you do that, the next day you can't read what you wrote down because you're... But I wrote down a date. What my lucid moment was Christmas 2008, after Lehman, was that, as we all know, crises are of all times. Some of them are homemade, like right now with the shutdown, homemade, but other ones are beyond your control. They happen, and they are good. I mean, it cleanses what is needed, the excesses which have been grown into the system. Let me give you a date for the next major crisis and what may happen on that date. It will happen undoubtedly on a Monday, because typically it's during the weekend that there is a bankers meeting between the investors and the company which has a problem, or there's a summit, or there's a meeting at the White House. When the markets are closed, people try to resolve the issue. And if you do not succeed before 11 o'clock Amsterdam time on that Sunday night, you know that the markets are going to take a beating on you. It also is fairly predictable that crises manifest themselves in September or October. I don't know what's in the air. Coming back from vacation, good intentions. Disappointing first half year, you have to give guidance for the next half year. Preparing the budget for next year. The General Assembly of the United Nations, IMF World Bank meeting, annual meeting. There are a lot of things in the air in September, October. And if you look at the history of crisis, it is always September, October. As a matter of fact, the shutdown is in October. Homemade. If you look at the history of crises, there's also something else in the air. There's a certain biblical logic. Major global crises happen every 7 years. 1994, Mexico. 2001, Enron. The Enron and Global Crossing, dot-com bubble burst. 2008, Lehman, we were just celebrating it. And again, a crisis is the panic which is infecting everything else. So, for all practical purposes, we can already fix the date for a next major crisis. And that's my forward-looking message to you. That's why I'm here, to help myself and my kids and my grandkids. And all of us say, well, let's understand the urgency and the priority of the agenda we have in front of us. It directly relates to what we're discussing here, whether you're in Amsterdam or in New York or anywhere else. 12 October, a Monday in 2015, the next major crisis will manifest itself. What is the nature of that crisis? Now, you know of crises, they always are different from the previous one. They are even more difficult to manage. They are more complicated. They require many more parties to help come to the solution. And I think what we are experiencing right now in the financial crisis in Europe, we see it is not just a financial crisis or an economic recession. It affects people. It affects everything. This crisis, what we also know about crises is that the signals were there already. I'm sure you have seen in the Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, or other newspapers that the signals of the panic in October 2008 around Lehman, the signals were there already long before. We could have anticipated it. The signals are there. Well, the signals for the next crisis are there also, already. And the problem is that we are suffering from unintentional blindness. Or, and many of you know the gorilla story, we're so focused on the issues of today that we forget that the real issue is somewhere else. The next crisis will be similar to what happened in 1973, and there may be some around the table who have lived 1973. OPEC realized that what was perceived to be a buyer's market in oil became a seller's market. And they took the opportunity. A geopolitical shift took place. So what will happen on this Monday, 12 October 2015? I'm sure some of you have read or are aware of the annual report, the sustainability report of Puma for the year 2011. Puma has, based on a number of studies I've been involved in, said my earnings before taxes is 300 million euros. But my EP&L, if I would monetize all the externalities, i.e. costs to nature, pollution, land use change, climate change, what have you, if I would fully cost those in my P&L, my earnings before taxes would only be 150 million. If nature would have a bank account, we should have paid 150 million into that bank account. That was the number one conclusion. And as a matter of fact, this whole monetization of the externalities has become a very prominent issue at the World Business Council, and undoubtedly some of you are also involved in how can I measure and manage the externalities, which may not be for my account right now, but will inevitably become expenses for us. But there was something else which Jochen Zeitz, the CEO of Puma, recognized, and I think that goes to the heart of my scenario. He also realized that 70% of the value creation of his company, the shoe manufacturing, he was dependent on the rubber planters, the smallholders, the farmers at the beginning of his value chain, supply chain, over whom he has no control. He realized that if there would be collective action of those at the beginning of his supply chain, he would have a big issue. I think we have to realize that we, in New York and Amsterdam, wherever, have become very dependent, like we did with oil in the 70s, of low-cost products from third world countries. Poor people who are excluded, cannot exercise their rights, have health issues. We do not realize how big the impact is we're making on them by the loss of biodiversity or the degradation of ecosystems and more, climate change. We are affecting them directly. At the same time, we're helping them, may not be through Bloomberg, but definitely through internet, social media, that they realize how much we have become dependent on them and how much we're impacting them. At some point in time, those people, the 70% of Jochen Zeitz in his value chain, will say, bad is worse. Not enough is not enough. I want my living wage. I want my children a future. And that may be a collective action which directly relate to people, planet, profit. And we in business should realize, it's my own variant of this, no people, no planet, no profit. We have an interest, and that goes beyond philanthropy. We have an interest to make sure that those in our supply chain have a decent living. To quote the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, well-being for all within planetary boundaries, with human justice. That's not just doing good. It is for us doing well for ourselves and future generation, and also for our P&L in the medium term. It is not just sustainabilizing our supply chain. If it would only be that, we can say, well, that's something which is being done in Europe or other places. We don't have to do that here. It is about stabilizing your supply chain. Your dependencies and impacts are directly affecting your business future and must be part of your core strategy to address them, and also must be dealt with at board level. That's precisely what G4 is doing. From indicators to materiality, which is also a qualitative concept, which is core strategy. Let me share you something else with you, how I came, not why I came, but what happened to me of being here. My own, so to speak, tipping points. It was 1998. I had just been appointed the chair of the risk committee at the bank, and there was a letter from one of those 1998 infamous NGOs, Friends of the Earth. And some of you undoubtedly have met Friends and Friends of the Earth. And they sent a letter. Now, if this would be a simple letter, we in the board would have ignored the letter in the first place. But, smart guys as they are, and they are, there were 800 signatories supporting the letter. That for a bank makes a difference, because even at that time you want to listen to your clients, even if it is all those sympathizers of a single advocacy NGO. So the question was, who is going to be the one who will speak with this advocacy group? Well, there was a very logical choice there. Who was to blame, quote unquote, to bring this infamous project related to a mining project in West Irian in Indonesia? Who brought it to the bank? Well, the unfortunate was me. In my global structured finance business, before that new role, I was the one who brought that to the bank. So, you do it. We had a meeting with the NGO, and as you typically do when you meet an NGO, you say, well, you prepare yourself, you give non-answers, you try to dilute the issue, defer the time, all the tricks which we try to do to not to be exposed publicly. Yet, another middle of the night, after the conversation with NGO, and I exactly did that, diffuse the issue. I woke up in the middle of the night and said, listen, that's not smart. I'll ask my colleague, country manager in Indonesia, to go to West Irian and check. He came back to me and said, Herman, they are absolutely right. It stinks. Corruption, ecosystem degradation, extortion, child labor, I mean, all the things which we are here discussing. So we invited the NGO back, and I had 3 answers. The first one, you're absolutely right. We are ashamed as a bank that we are involved in this credit. We did not do our due diligence well enough. We should have looked beyond the traditional financial issues which a bank typically did. Second thing, we are so ashamed that we are with this credit, we want to sell the credit to another bank. We want to get out of it. Thirdly, you have added a new dimension. And again, this was the enemy. You have added a new dimension to the way we look at risk or at our investment policies. Now, you can imagine how the response was of this NGO. The first one was, can we publish your first comment? And he said, absolutely, you can publish it. Secondly, we do not want you to sell the credit to somebody else. We want you to put pressure on the company to improve its practices. And thirdly, under no set of circumstances, and we're talking about 1998, in the meantime things have changed, are we prepared to help you in improving your risk policies? That was my tipping point. The second one is, and I think both tipping points are relevant for what we're trying to do here. The first one is look beyond your traditional screen or your lens. Use people who you typically do not engage with, but who are smart, innovative, include them in your strategy setting, in your policies. Consult them, engage with them. The second one, and I'm sure many of you face the same situation from day to day in an organization which is skeptical about the things you carry for. That's true for a CEO, but also for the head of a sustainability or corporate responsibility department. I was sitting in the credit committee, and there was a proposal to finance an oil field in Venezuela. Everything was all right. $3 million in fees. I mean, excellent deal. Could have been the deal of the year, with one exception. They wanted to waive an independent environmental assessment evaluation. And as a chair of the risk committee, my privilege was to say no, which I did. You can imagine the house was too small. $3 million down the drain, because a competitor was prepared to waive it. That's all about level playing field. So I had a major credibility issue in the bank. Fortunately, I had a meeting with Peter Woyke, the then chief executive of IFC, and he also had a problem, because IFC, as you know, has excellent performance standards, but how do I get that into the banking sector? We convened a meeting in London with 12 large banks, and Mike was referring to it already, and invited each of the banks to have a case presented by them in which they are dealing with community organizations, labor issues, I mean, deep in their value chain of their own clients, and discuss those. We had 12 cases and one common cause. It was the first international sector agreement, one common cause at the end of the afternoon. One of the partners at that time was Citibank. As you may recall, in 2002-03, Citi was under severe pressure from NGOs. So the time was ripe for them to move as well, despite the legal counsel within Citibank, who felt they were overstepping the boundaries. Again, this was 2002 to 2003. I'm still grateful to Citibank that senior management says, yes, there is a risk of a liability, but yes, we have to set an example as a bank, together with other international banks, to step up. That was I would say, a game changer, and subsequently a lot of other sectoral agreements were created. But it sets the stage for a period where many voluntary agreements within the sectors took place. As a matter of fact, GRI itself was very much benefiting from that situation. Mike was rightfully saying GRI was created here in the US, but it moved its head offices to Amsterdam in 2001, and it started producing G2, 3, 3.1, and now G4. What's happening right now in the marketplace is that voluntarism is not good enough anymore. We have to have further pressure, and that also comes from the leading practitioners in the sectors. Say, well, we did our bit, but now we want, for level play reasons or for value chain reasons, we want other companies involved in this as well. And the only one who can force this, quote unquote, are the governments or stock exchanges or any other one who has a role in society which will cause change of behavior amongst reporters. That's the reality of today. That's why at GRI we attach a lot of importance to working with Indian government, Brazilian government, South African government, for them to adopt, report, or explain why not policies and legislation. Flexible, principles-based, but very effective. The European Union soon is going to introduce a legislation, a directive, which will possibly catapult the number of sustainability reports in Europe from a meager 2,000 to 18,000 in the next couple of years. That is exactly the type of ambition and reality we are facing. Sustainability reporting is becoming mainstream. Now you have sustainability reporting and sustainability reporting. The way we do it at GRI is multi-stakeholder, inclusive and global. And that is reflected in our governance structure. It is reflected in our procedures, in our processes. It goes to the heart. We are not focusing on listed companies only or investors only. We look at the broad spectrum of all reporters, listed companies, unlisted companies, state-owned enterprises, cities, large organizations. All of them need to show their sustainability or their corporate responsibility initiatives, performance, and targets. As far as the users are concerned, it is not just the investors. It is also society, it is partners, it is customers, it is off-takers. Any large company in a supply chain wants to know for its own representation to its investors how well it is managing its supply chain. So there is a broad-scale movement that it is beyond listed companies only and investors only. It is a much broader issue. It comes back to the issue that we are all part of a society where every client, every supplier, every partner, even every, as you've been discussing here, every employee wants to know what the company stands for, what it does about it, and how it is proceeding on that. We're also global. And I can assure you, we have a board which is global, a stakeholder council, which is 50 members, and they are a mosaic of all countries and all sectors. We have representatives from business, mediating institutions, consultants, labor, civil society organizations, and they all have their representation, and it's a democratic election process. Managing that is quite complicated. It's managing diversity. But it also offers the legitimacy and the authority which the output, which that stakeholder council has to approve, provides to the framework. So is G4. G4 was not just an invention of a secretariat in Amsterdam, not at all. It was prepared by about 120 members of working groups, people who are actively, and I'm sure some of you have been involved, for which we are extremely grateful. But it also had 2 public consultation periods, which were very well addressed. So the product of G4 is very much a collective exercise. It's the state of the art. It is a next stage in our trajectory. And of course, there will be 4.1 or 4.2 in the future, because it's like the walk on the path. It is something where we evolve, where we learn from our stakeholders, where we learn ourselves because of the environment around us. Let me go back to my history, my background as a banker. And I heard this morning in the workshop some comments made on this very issue. Risk-taking is a function of being fully aware and informed about what the risks are. The better you are informed or aware of the operational, the financial health of a company, the more you know about the risks in the value chain, and the know you more about the context within which this company is operating, the lower the risk will be, because you know what you're doing. And that's not retrospective. That is forward-looking. That comes back to the issue of materiality in the G4 framework. It is forward-looking. It must be forward-looking because the past is the past. As long-term investors, we are supposed to take 5-10-year investment decisions, although the duration of investors typically is much shorter in these days. But you have to take a forward-looking view. You have to take the net present value of the future vulnerabilities. And we all know non-financial issues of today eventually become financial issues of tomorrow. We have to address those now and take remedial action. G for all is what we are. Multi-stakeholder, global. And it is important that we realize that if we want to make markets fit for purpose, and markets are not fit for purpose, and the prices are not right because asymmetries in information, reporting is a key driver to improve the functioning of companies, markets, towards a better world. And that's what we want. That's the ethical mission we all should have. And business, the private sector, and even more I would say it in the United States, the private sector should drive the agenda and take responsibility. There will be the moment that not reporting material risks in your annual report or sustainability report will become a liability. And that may be sooner than you think. Because if you do not inform investors, partners, or licensors, or anyone of material issues which you are aware of but not reporting, you may have a problem. It probably is true that the ones who can change the name of the game are the auditors or the lawyers. I can see already within the auditing community, and many of you are in that already, the split, the spagatis between the assurance providers and the advisory services. And how do you reconcile that in the management letter? There's a reasonable assurance on a broad or small piece of your sustainability performance in accordance with what the regulators want you to do, and your advisor, in the advisory function, they go much further, much more advanced what sustainability will mean for that business. And of course, you cannot have the same client for the same things at the same time, but the reality is there. The lawyers still have to see the light, not mention, even if it is not within the requirement of the law, not mentioning material risks which you know are in your value chain, and I hope they know, and they should know as a responsible board, should become a liability. I think that's particularly an issue here in the US, and I hope that lawyers will change. And I think we have a collective responsibility to take care of that world, those markets, those companies with which we're working. And I'm extremely proud to be involved in GRI, one of the founding fathers of IRC as well, because that will be the end game, whatever it will be, because it hasn't been defined yet, that we are moving into that direction. GRI itself was a change agent for the last 15 years. We are now a recognized standard setter, officially referred to in the EU legislation, in the OECD guidelines. We have strong relationship with the Global Compact, ISO. We are a standard setter. And we expect that in many countries, the GRI G4 will be referred to as a reference for how companies, and I hope 100,000 in the next 4 or 5 years, of which 18,000 in Europe, will use the G4. But I'm not here to promote only GRI. I'm here to promote every bit of energy which is required to move the agenda. This goes beyond GRI. Because it's a crowded space, many professionals, as passionate as I am about sustainability or corporate responsibility, are stepping in, and we should make use of that. So my message to all of us here is align, work together, seek complementary cooperation. But also recognize that, as Mao Zedong said, 1,000 flowers may blossom. My addition to that is, but not more. Thank you very much.
That was inspiring and a little chastening at the same time, I think, Herman. But before I get into some questions with you, I want to ask the audience, I'd like to see a show of hands. How many of you have heard of the economist Adam Smith? Show of hands, please.
I can't see anything.
Yeah, a lot of you. No, you haven't. Because Adam Smith was not an economist. Adam Smith was the chairman of the moral philosophy department at Glasgow University. And in fact, when he wrote Wealth of Nations, he never used the word capitalism. He spoke about a concept of natural liberties that would be released by organizing markets and the economy under a moral framework. So my first question for you, Herman, is how the hell did we get here? Once upon a time, and particularly I think about in America, there was an ethic that went with, it started out in New England with sort of, as did GRI, with a kind of a Yankee sensibility of thrift and accountability. How did we get here?
My answer is, how do we get out of here? I mean, we are here. And I think we lost touch with the reality. And the financial sector itself is a good example. The financial economy which we have been seeing here has nothing to do with the real economy in which we're living. How we got there? Don't have the answer, but you need a crisis sometimes to get out of that.
So let's talk about that, because you talked about the biblical periodicity of crises, implying that they are every 7 years. I fear they might become with greater frequency, and that we're talking about multiple crises, climactic, financial, and otherwise. But my second question, given my precept about Yankee thrift and so forth, is what's wrong with America? What's wrong with us? I mean, Mike's been working his tail off for, 2.5 years now to increase the amount of reporting among U.S. companies. And that seed has found purchase. You've made great progress. But we're nowhere near the level of transparency that our European counterparts are. What's wrong with America?
I think you're the one to answer that question.
Let me put it a slightly different way. Why do you think there's greater resistance? Why has there been greater resistance in America? I mean, you were founded in Boston. You went to Amsterdam. You come back and
well,
we're not doing it yet.
Maybe we should come back. I mean, maybe we should come back. That's right. No, but I think the reality, I think, and you see it also with some large companies, that those companies are, some of those companies, and I think this country as well, is also driven by the fear of liability. It's a legal system which is affecting progressive thoughts. And I think if I read the press talking about, say, the Rana Plaza accident and the follow-up, what do you do to prevent this to happen again? Some of the US companies have made steps, but were clearly cautioned by their legal department not to step too far in assuming responsibility in the value chain. Well, you may reduce your legal liability, but in the meantime, your brand with consumers or your respectability in society will be seriously affected. And I think you have to, who am I from the Netherlands, small country, who am I to advise you? But I think it is clear that the legal system here has becoming an obstacle in to enable progressive minds to take responsibility, and as a matter of fact, take leadership, which I would hope you would take, the financial sector, the business sector here, to take leadership in addressing global issues. The legal system here, I think, is a major obstacle. But as I said in my introduction, I also strongly believe, and the reality will be seen I hope in the near future, not reporting the right material risks which you run in your company and in your value chain, but are nevertheless there, is not in the interest of investors, neither in the interest of the rest of society. So I'm just waiting for the moment that there will be legal counsel from the large corporations here speak out listen, we have to the legal brotherhood have to change our perspective what the risks are. Because disclosing material risk in your value chain, in my view, is something which you owe to your investors and to the rest of society.
So we're a little short on time. I would entertain a question or two from the audience, but I have one more for you. And I don't want to eat into our networking time because many of you have made very clear to me in the past that you find the networking to be of equal value to hearing us yap up here on stage. So, Herman, within the last couple of years, the Sustainable Accountability Standards Board has launched here in the States. I hear when we announce our 100 Best Corporate Citizens every year from a lot of these folks in this room that they are suffering from reporting fatigue. Now, reporting is, I think, the sine qua non of reaching the advancements that you were talking about. You can't wash your face if you don't look in the mirror. But what does that do? Because I hear some people saying you two are at odds. GRI and SASB are competing against one another.
Well, you're asking two questions, and let me give you two answers. The first one is the reporting fatigue. I mean, that is what we say sometimes, keep it simple, but not simpler. These are strategic issues. Reporting is not the purpose by itself. Reporting is a reflection of the thought process in a company. And as we have been discussing here, with full engagement of staff who produce the energy. I mean, the first sustainability report which you write is one big celebration because suddenly you discover what good things staff and the organization are doing already. So reporting is not the purpose per se. Reporting helps markets. But even more important, it helps companies to focus on the things which really matter. So that, I think, is an important message. The fatigue, I think, is the wrong view of what is happening. It is what's happening internally in the organization, and we've seen a lot of examples here. On SASB, it's quite clear that SASB is highly complementary to GRI. I wish we had a SASB-type initiative in India, because it really focused on creating the energy here to expand in the thinking of companies to work on sustainability. So I mean, and that's what we have been saying all along, despite perceptions in the market. We encourage SASB to do its work, except that I would add to that 1,000 flowers may blossom, but not more. It must be aligned, because we don't want to confuse investors or regulators or other ones that we have 2 different systems or 3 different systems. It must come together. Even if the why is in common, the what at this stage may be different, but that should come together. And I would say over the heads of all of you, I would really invite SASB to sit down with you and see how can we completely align. Because these perceptions in the marketplace are a disservice for the why we're here.
Fair enough. Well, with that, I'm going to bring this to a close, Elliot. I think don't want to cut into the networking time, as I said. Folks, if you'd please help me thank Herman.